Hey, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. It's great to be gathered here as God's people and as God's family. And today, of all days, we're jumping back into this series, Running on Empty. And in this series, I don't know if it's been this way for you, but this series has been extremely timely for me personally because May is here. And if your May is anything like mine, May is just this insane, crazy time of year. Is that right? Does anybody else feel this? Yeah. May, because here's what's going on. May has the end of the school year, but it seems like everything, even those areas of life that are not really tied to that academic calendar, it still feels like everyone has this sort of sensation of like we can smell that summer is coming. Summer is almost here. But before we get to summer, we have to do everything imaginable and add it to our calendars, right? We have to go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And we barely have a chance to breathe, much less plan what is actually going on in our lives. And we often feel like we're running on an empty tank of gas. It actually reminds me, the month of May reminds me of my former congregation up in Indianapolis because, you know, today is a holiday up there as well. And it's not just Memorial Day weekend. Today in Indianapolis is race day, okay? Today is the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500, and I thought to myself, what a great picture of the month of May. A bunch of cars driving around in circles as fast as they possibly can, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times until somebody crosses the finish line and is the winner. Only the problem in our lives, as we are running like that, is that when we cross the finish line, all we have is the next day on the calendar and the next to-do list item and the next task in front of us. And it just feels like we are running on empty. Throughout this series, we've talked about a number of different things that leave us feeling depleted and drained. And a number of these things they're not actually bad in and of themselves. They're actually, in a lot of cases, good things for us, but we just run out and feel completely depleted because we're running 90 miles an hour trying to get everything done. And today we come to one of, I think, the most draining things in so many of our lives and in the American society, and that is work. Worker burnout has been a topic of conversation from social media to news organizations to survey and polling gatherers. Worker burnout is a hot topic of conversation. And that conversation has only intensified in the last half decade or so in the wake of a pandemic that dramatically altered the workplace environment, giving rise to remote and hybrid occupations and introducing all kinds of different challenges that we didn't have before to our work. But this is a problem, and the draining nature of our work is not something that I think is confined to an occupation or to the workplace environment specifically. This is something that I think exists and taxes us, even many of us in this room don't have a full-time job that we are earning money as our employment, but we do have work that we are called to do. We do have roles and positions and things in our lives that take our time and attention and require it. And too often, these things which are good things in and of themselves, they can become something that we resent, at least part of the time, if not all of the time. And so what we're going to do today is explore from a biblical perspective this concept of work, what God intends for it. And we're going to see if one of these things that becomes the most depleting and emptying things for us can actually become something that we find fulfillment in light of what Christ has done for us. So that's where we are headed this morning in our study today. We're going to start all the way back at the beginning in Genesis chapter 1, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but worker burnout is not a new problem, okay? Worker burnout and the challenges with work goes all the way back almost to the very beginning of time. Because what we read, even at creation in Genesis chapter 1, we read about how God gives Adam a job. Okay, God creates Adam and Eve, and what he does is he tasks Adam with a job. He gives Adam work to do, and here's what he says in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. He tells Adam, "Fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." God gives Adam the job of being the steward, the caretaker of the creation that he has made. Only we know how this turns out very quickly. Adam rebels against God's commands. And when that rebellion, that sin, enters the world through Adam, all of a sudden work takes on a very different character and flavor. See, the consequences of Adam's sin are far-reaching, and one of the places impacted most is work. God talks about the consequence of Adam's sin in Genesis chapter 3, verse 17, when he said, "Cursed is the ground because of you, and through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life." And a couple verses later, he says, "It's by the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground." And work, which was given to be this great blessing to Adam and to all of God's creation around him, becomes something that is a painful toil. It's hard. It's by the sweat of his brow that he does his work. And it's not only that work is hard, it's that work also doesn't yield what it should according to God's original design. It's when Adam is going to work hard to till the ground, to grow crops, whatever Adam's going to do, it's going to be hard, and it's not going to be as productive and fruitful as it otherwise would have been. And I think we experience this today, even if we are in the agricultural industry or whether it's just income and wages that we are earning. Our work, we pour so much into it, and we seem to get very little back out of it, don't we? And as the cost of living rises all around us, we find that we are getting less and less and less in return for all of the sweat of our brow that we put into our work. And it's draining. But it isn't just the measurables that make our work so depleting and frustrating. In fact, I would wager to say that it's actually the intangibles that are more frustrating and more depleting for us in our work. For instance, work brings with it its own stresses and problems, right? Whatever work we have in front of us can be stressful. And I was interested as I was looking up some survey data for this. There's this group called Gallup. And Gallup conducts surveys and polls for all kinds of areas of society. And one of the things that they do year after year is they conduct a survey about job satisfaction among American workers. And it's interesting what they found over the last quarter century or so, there hasn't actually been a lot of fluctuation between people's satisfaction with their work. And what they find year after year is somewhere between 45 and 50% of people report that they are completely satisfied with their jobs. And that leaves about half of the people left over, and of that half, more than half of them say they are at least somewhat satisfied with their job. So the satisfaction of American workers tends to be, in my opinion, like fairly high. But they also ask a bunch of follow-up questions about different aspects of people's work. And one of the interesting things that they found is that even among the same sample of people, people who have said, to a high degree that they are at least somewhat satisfied with their job, they find that of people, they ask them about their on-the-job stress. And they say, are you satisfied with your level of on-the-job stress? And they find that only 25 to 30% of the people that responded said they were completely satisfied with that. Isn't that interesting? People who, the majority of whom are at least content with the job they have, they're okay with their job, and the majority of them tend to have stress that overwhelms them from time to time in their workplace, even the jobs that we like. And the problem with workplace stress is that that's something that kind of clings to you, doesn't it? It's one of those things that doesn't just go away just because you leave the office or just because you log off the Zoom call, but it tends to stick with you. And all of these hardships about our work, about the work and what is in front of us to do, all of that kind of adds up to a certain malaise and a certain meaninglessness about our work. We start to feel like our work is pretty pointless, and what is the purpose of me doing this at all? And it reminded me a lot of the story that we read earlier in our worship service from John chapter 21. This is when the disciples, they go out in a boat to catch some fish, and they fish all night and they catch nothing. They catch nothing. And you have to imagine that would have been a pretty frustrating night, to spend all that night working, you have absolutely no results from it. But think about this. You have to situate this in the context that the disciples find themselves, because the disciples, this happens just a few weeks, within those few weeks after Jesus has risen from the dead. So put yourselves in their shoes for a moment. They have been following around Jesus Christ, the very Son of God made flesh, for 3 years. They've been watching him preach the most incredible messages and sermons that the world has ever seen. They have seen him do miraculous healings. They have seen this man rise from the dead, the kind of purpose they would have had in Jesus' ministry. And now that Jesus is risen from the dead, what are they left to do? Get in the boat, go out there, try and catch some fish. And the disciples, I think maybe even more frustrating than catching nothing. Imagine what that feeling would have been like, just thinking, what are we even doing out here? What is the point of this work in front of us? Have you ever felt that way about your own work? About whatever vocation is in front of you? Have you ever felt, what is the point of this? And it's at this spot that it's good for us to turn our attention to what the scriptures say about work and God's design and God's intention for work for mankind. And one of the places for us to go, we've already been at the beginning. That would be in Genesis chapter 1, where we see something really interesting. And did you catch this about work? Work is given before Adam falls into sin. Did you see that? So all the way in Genesis chapter 1, God assigns Adam something to do. He gives work to Adam even before there is sin, even before there's evil in the world. So work is not actually some kind of bad, inherently bad thing. It's not even like a necessary evil, but it is actually part of God's design for his creatures. It's something good. And to push this point even further still, you notice who actually does the most work in Genesis chapter 1. It's not Adam. It's God himself. God is the one who is working in creation. And we may think, well, all he does is speak a word and creation exists. That's hardly called work. But actually, Genesis calls it work. In the summary of what's going on at creation, in Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, we read, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Work is something that God has given to Adam to be a blessing. Work is something that God himself does and engages in. So we start to understand that work can't be bad. In fact, work must, in its pure form, it must be something that is good for us and necessary. There's a word that we sometimes use to talk about our work. It's a word used more in ancient times, or not ancient times. It's used more in the past than it is used today, and that word is vocation. Sometimes this word vocation is used synonymously with occupation. Like if you ask someone, hey, what's your vocation? The understanding is you're kind of talking about their job. But the word vocation encompasses a lot more than just what we do for a living or what we do to earn our wages. A vocation is a position that you have and hold, whether or not you are paid for it. And we can have vocations even in our own families. You can have your vocation as a mother or father, as a son or daughter. You have a vocation in your own neighborhood, a vocation and a calling in how you interact with the people around you, or in the greater community in Georgetown or wherever it is that you live. You have a vocation in your community. You have a vocation right here at Zion Lutheran Church as the community of faith here on the hilltop. We have all these vocations that go even beyond paid employment that applies to each one of us because we have things that we have been given to do. And that word vocation is really important because it comes from this Latin term vocare. It comes from this Latin word vocare, which means to call. This word to call gives us a bunch of English words that we use like vocalist or like convocation, a calling together of people. See, the understanding behind vocation is that it is a calling, first of all, a calling from God. Our vocations are calling from God. And so to understand a vocation is to understand that it is something that has been given to you. There's a sense in which you have not chosen it. And many of these is very apparent, right? We haven't chosen our own family that we are born into. And God has given us all these vocations to the people around us, whether we have chosen where we are going to live. No matter where it is, we are called to a vocation in that community. We are given a calling to interact with the people around us. But I think there's a certain sense, and maybe even a pretty strong sense, in which even the vocations that we choose, even the things we choose to do, are vocations that are really callings that have been given to us by God. After all, God is the one who has given you your talents and your resources and your interests and the people around you. There are many ways in which God has actually called you to the vocations that you hold. And this is why Paul, when he writes in Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, he's able to say this. He says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for human masters. Work at it as if you are working for the Lord. Because what Paul understands, and what Paul wants his readers to see and embrace, is that your work, whatever it is a calling given to you from God. And so vocation is, first of all, this calling from God. And a vocation, second of all, is a calling to others. So we have this calling that we've received from God, but it is a directional calling directed outward, okay? We think sometimes, we get this thinking backwards, where we think of our vocations as things that are mainly about us, and we spend all of our time kind of figuring out what is the vocation that I am supposed to do, what am I supposed to do for work? Or we spend our time at our vocations just trying to pass time, just trying to get to the end of the day where I can finally take home my paycheck, or just where I can finally sit down and have some well-deserved me time. And we think of our vocations as if they're about us, but your vocation isn't about you. It's a calling to others. Your vocation is about your clients, or about your boss, or about your child's teacher, or about your family, about your husband or your wife, about your children. Your vocation is about your neighbor. And so we are given these callings from God that are directed outwardly because God himself is going to meet the needs of the people around you. And God has chosen to do that through the work that you are doing. Our vocations are meant so that God would use us to serve the people around us, to meet the needs of the people in our family and the people in our community in all kinds of ways by the work that he has given us to do and by the work that he has called us to. And so as we understand vocation in these terms, as we understand our work, whatever it is that's in front of us to do, in these terms, in terms of the way the scriptures outline them, we start to run into a little bit of uneasiness and a little bit of a problem, right? Because it turns out we have all kinds of different vocations, not just one or two. So then what am I supposed to do when I have vocations that kind of clash? If I have a God-given calling to my family, and if I have a God-given calling to my employer, what am I supposed to do when those vocations step right on top of each other? And that's a really challenging one for us to navigate, because I can go home from here and there are about 8 different ways that I could go and serve my neighbor, but there's only one of me. And as we all know from painful experience, there's only 24 short hours in the day. Hardly enough time for me to meet all of those needs in every vocation and not be left running on empty. Just absolutely gassed. So is there a way then that we might maximize our work? Is there a way in which our work, what is given for us to do, our different vocations, could be a thing that is fulfilling to us and to the people around us rather than draining upon everyone? And I think as we look to what we have learned about vocation, there's a few things that we can do. First of all, what we can do is prioritize your vocations, okay? Prioritize your vocations. When you have these different callings in your life, there's going to be times where they are stepping on one another, and we need, instead of just kind of letting it happen to us, to have some intentionality and be deliberate about how we are going to approach all of these different callings that God has given to us. Now, what I don't mean is rank your vocations like you have number 1 at the top, and then everything below that is gonna fall away at the expense of that first thing you listed. That's not how it works. Because God has called us not to just the number one thing, but to all of those things down the list. But what it does mean to prioritize our vocations is to understand that if you are going to say yes to something, understand that means you are saying no to something else you could be doing with that time and attention. And it means as you go through your life, kind of on a case-by-case basis, you need to understand where your attention is going. And prioritize your vocation so that the callings that God has given to you don't get left by the wayside at the expense of another one. And making these kind of decisions is really hard and challenging. And so it's why it's helpful to have a little bit of a framework and kind of use the framework we've talked about to evaluate those decisions as well. And so the second thing we can do to sort of maximize our work, to find fulfillment in the vocations God has given to us, is to look for God's callings. Look for God's callings. If we understand our vocation, that is that God has called us to do something, then look at how God has called us to do what we are doing. Look at the talents and the resources God has given to you. Look at the situations He's placed you in. Because there are unique callings that God has given to only you. You are the only one given the vocations in your family. You are the only one that can fulfill the role that you have in whatever work that you are doing. And God has called you uniquely to that time and to that place and that work. And understand that God has gifted you uniquely for that calling. And so find those places where God has placed you specifically to do the work that is in front of you, because He hasn't called someone else to do that. And then thirdly, I think one of the things that we can do to help ourselves to find fulfillment in work is number 3, measure your work in service. Measure your work in service, because this is, after all, what God intends for our work, isn't it? God intends for our work to be of service to our neighbor, to be oriented outwardly towards other people. And so don't fall prey to these temptations, because it's so easy for us to measure our work in terms of how many items we checked off our to-do list, right? Or how much money we make, or here's the really dangerous one, to measure our work in terms of how many hours we commit to that certain vocation. But instead, look at your work in terms of what God is doing through it. God is using your vocations to be a blessing to the people around you. And the children of God that He dearly loves, the people that He handcrafted and created, He is providing for them and meeting their needs through the work of your vocations. And what a blessing it is for us to be a part of God's work in those people's lives. Because God is actively working. And God works through us, but God also works in a different way that is completely apart from the work that we can do ourselves. See, there's a vocation that is given not to us, but is a vocation that the triune God has taken up on our behalf alone. There's things that we can't do at all. And so, when the disciples take the boat out there in John chapter 21 and their nets come back completely empty, just think of how emblematic that is. Not only do they have no physical yield, but those empty nets provide such a great picture, I think, of what we actually bring before God in terms of our spiritual health. We actually don't have any works that we can offer up to God and say, hey, here's my best effort that I've done. Won't you be pleased with me because of this? That's not how it works. Because even our best effort is not good enough. And yet, that's not the vocation God has called us to. Jesus says during his ministry in John chapter 5, verse 17, he says, "My Father is always at his work to this very day, and I too am working. And we have a Savior who by speaking his word can fill those nets to overflowing." That vocation of redemption and salvation is not a shared responsibility. It's one that has been given to God alone, and he has done it for you. There's a really important interaction that comes at the end of the passage we read, right after that. So the disciples bring the boat in to the seashore, and they share a breakfast meal with Jesus, and then right there on the beach, Jesus takes Peter aside for an important conversation. The very same Peter who 3 times denied that he had even known Jesus in Jesus' hour of greatest need. And Jesus takes that same Peter aside, and he has a conversation in which he forgives and reinstates Peter. He restores Peter, and what's really interesting is not only does he bring Peter back into the fold, he commissions Peter to go forward, and he tells Peter 3 times again to go and feed my sheep. Because Peter's darkest, gravest sin is a sin for which Christ died. And it is a sin that Christ forgives. And because of that, Peter's work is a work that Christ has redeemed and commissioned. And whatever sins might be haunting you, however dark they might seem to you, they are sins for which Christ died. They are sins that Christ forgives. And because of that work that God has done for you, your work is a work that Christ has redeemed. It's not something that you have to run the rat race so that you can finally earn some kind of favor, but God has actually done this entirely for you. And now your work is simply taking part in what God himself is doing in the world because God has called you to it and gifted you for it. God has redeemed every last one of your vocations in his son Jesus. And so to kind of wrap up today, there is another holiday coming up this week. And it's not the Indianapolis 500, and it's not Memorial Day. Actually, coming up on Thursday is a holiday in the church's calendar. It's a holiday that is sadly not celebrated or observed with quite the vigor that it has been for most of the church's history. But Thursday coming up is Ascension Day. Ascension Day marks 40 days after Easter, because 40 days after Jesus rose from the dead, after he appeared to his disciples and many, many, many others, Jesus gathered his disciples on the Mount of Olives in Bethany. And there he ascended into heaven right before their eyes. And so Ascension Day commemorates that. But not just that event. Ascension Day commemorates the reality that exists now for us because Jesus has ascended into heaven. See, when Jesus came down to earth to be born as a little baby, he took on all of these limitations of mankind. He bled, he hurt, he wept. He was located in this time and place, and now that he has ascended to the right hand of God, Jesus Christ is present with us. He goes before us and behind us. He is with us everywhere. All of those limitations he voluntarily took upon himself are gone. And Jesus Christ rules in power and glory at the right hand of God. And why this matters for us is because Jesus is always with us. And it matters for us because this work that Jesus does of ruling and reigning over creation, he has chosen to do this through his people and through his church. And so our work and the vocations that God has called us to that are right in front of us are a work that Christ himself is doing. We get to be an extension in the hands and feet of Jesus in the work that he has called us to do. A work that is indeed very good, just as it was in the garden. A work that is holy, that he has called each of us to. And so I invite you to reflect on the words of this song as we consider our own work and the work that our Savior has done for us. For these days that we call ours, God's hands began their work, separating earth from sky and waters from the earth. Day by day the world took form, the word is all it took. When he saw what he had made, it was holy, pleasing, good. Before we ever knew his name, he took on flesh and bone and walked along these weary streets, shouldering our load. When his hour had finally come, he hung on cursed wood. With one last breath, his work was done. It was holy, pleasing, good. And now we're walking free to give what we've received, to love this weary world like Jesus would. Bless our hands and our work you have called us to. Make it holy, pleasing, good. Make it holy, pleasing, good. Holy, pleasing, good. Let these double doors swing wide. Your word has lit our path. Lead us on our narrow way. Use us where we stand until you come and make the world look just like it should. And take our lives and let them be holy, pleasing, good. And now we're walking free to give what we've received, to love this weary world like Jesus would. Bless our hands and our work you have called us to. Make it holy, pleasing, good. Make it holy, pleasing, good. Holy, pleasing, good. Let's sing this chorus all together as we leave this place. Why don't you stand with me? Come on. And now we're walking free to give what we've received, to love this weary world like Jesus would. Bless our hands and our work you have called us to. Make it holy, pleasing, good. Make it holy, pleasing, good. Holy, pleasing, good. On that day when I rest and my race is run, I'll hear holy, pleasing, good. Holy, pleasing, good.